Good morning, everybody. Good to see some old familiar faces I haven't seen for a while. Thank you all for being here. So welcome to Fellowship Bible Church, South Campus. My name is Jacob Chamberlin, and I'm the pastor here of this church. Thankful that you're able to weather the storms and get here with us today that we had last night. I woke up this morning completely shocked. My wife was up all night watching the TV and things, and I slept through it all. So did my daughter. I woke up, there's limbs all over the place. I was kind of shocked. Anyways, thank you for being here this morning. So this morning we are going to continue our trip through the book of Ruth. We have been going through the book of Ruth, and today we're going to continue that journey. So as we have said before, the story of Ruth takes place during the time called the time of the Judges. It was a very, very dark time in the world. Things were pretty bad. So the children of Israel finally, if you know the story, they were finally in the land of Israel. They were finally in the land of promise. However, they hadn't done what God had told them to do. God had told them to take possession of all the land in Israel. They had not done that yet. Joshua had faithfully led the people to the promised land, to the nation of Israel, and they were to conquer it. And before Joshua died, he told them, this is what he told them. He told them and he warned them. He said, you are to drive out the inhabitants of the land. You are to push out these idol-worshiping people and destroy their idols. That was his instructions to them. He said, there's a danger. If you do not do this, they are going to become a trap. They're going to become a snare to you. This is what he said. He said, they're going to be like whips on your side. You can imagine how bad that would hurt. They will be like thorns in your eyes until you are dead, basically. I mean, it's a pretty strong warning that Joshua gave to them. And so the people took this warning on board, and they started out very strong, right? They started pushing the people out. But as happens with all of us in our lives, pretty soon they got comfortable. They got comfortable dwelling among their enemies. They let the people just dwell there in the land with them. And there were these little pockets of idol-worshiping people in the promised land that the people of God got comfortable with. And this really was the downfall of Israel. This really was the downfall of what happened to them, because exactly what Joshua said would happen to them is exactly what happened. They started seeing how people worship their idols and their false gods, and sure enough, they started doing the same thing. And so through the book of Judges, through a lot of the Old Testament really, this is what we see Israel sliding further and further into depravity, further and further into wickedness and evil. Everyone doing what is right in their own eyes. Everybody doing whatever they want, everybody giving in to every selfish desire that they have. And you know, this same thing can be applied to us. This very same thing can happen to us when we allow little pockets of sin to exist in our hearts. When we allow those little enemies to dwell in our hearts, whether it be bitterness or anger or hatred or selfishness, like we're going to talk about today, or lust, whatever it is, when these little enemies dwell in little pockets in your heart and you get tired of fighting them, you get tired of warring against them, pretty soon they take over, and guess what? Now you're doing whatever seems right in your own eyes. You're living a selfish life. You're not worried about the desires and cares and concerns of others. You're only worried and cared about your own concerns. And this is going to be our focus this morning. The natural selfishness of man and the godly character of the person of God who should live a selfless life. And in our story today, we're going to get a good picture of what that looks like. I wanted to give you a quick little definition of selfishness that we can all kind of, I would think we can all agree with it, but this is something Oscar Wilde said. This is what he said selfishness was. He said, selfishness is not living as one wishes to live. It is asking others to live as one wishes to live. He says, selfishness is not living like you want to live. That's not selfishness. Selfishness is asking others to live like you want to live. That is selfishness. I think that's a great definition. And I would say that perfectly encapsulates where our culture is at today, where our nation is at today, where our world is at today. I'm going to live how I want, and guess what? You're going to live how I want too. And things were no different in the time of Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. Things were wicked in the land. People were selfish. They had forgot about the goodness of God. They started pursuing their own desires, and because of that, they had become very selfish. And in our passage for today, we're going to see how these three godly people stood against the flow of culture. They stood against the desire to live selfish lives. They stood against it, and rather than thinking about only themselves and their own selfish desires, they laid their selfish desires down, and they lived their lives in order to bless others, to be a blessing to others. And in this way, they continue to teach us what selflessness looks like. They continue to teach us today what selflessness looks like. So we're going to be in the third chapter of the book of Ruth. As I said, we've been making our way through. We've been doing a chapter a week. This week we will be in chapter 3. So what's been going on in the book of Ruth up till this point? So we finished chapter 2 last week, and at the end of chapter 2, the harvest had not yet happened. So between the end of chapter 2 and chapter 3, where we're going to be today, there's obviously a few week window. There's a few weeks has passed, because now it's the time harvest has happened. The wheat and the barley has been harvested, and it's the time called the threshing time. Now, they would thresh the grain, and what happened was the grain has a husk on it. The wheat and the barley has this shell on it, and so in order to break that shell, they would lay it out on the ground. They would have animals walk over it, usually pulling some kind of thing behind it that would crush the grain, break the husks off of the grain, separate the two, and then someone would take that grain and throw it up in the air. When a breeze was coming, the breeze would come, it would blow away the chaff, it would blow away the husk, the grain would fall to the ground. And that was threshing. And that was the time of season that we're in now. Harvest is over, now it's the threshing time. And it was usually a time of great celebration because the hard work of farming was now over. Now people just got to sit back and enjoy the fruits of their labor. And so Boaz, as we get into the chapter, we're going to see Boaz is at the threshing floor. He's threshing his grain, and it's evening time. And he was probably there in the evening time because that's when the winds would be most favorable. And so he's working there threshing. And as chapter 3 opens up, we're going to get to hear a little conversation between Naomi and Ruth. And what we're going to see is Naomi is starting to hatch a little plan. She's plotting and scheming. So let's look at what the little conversation that Naomi is having with Ruth. Verse 1. Then Naomi, Ruth's mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you?" So what Ruth is basically saying is, I want to see you settled in life, Ruth. I want to see you have a husband. I want to see you settled. Should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash, therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go in and cover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do. And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." Now, if you've been following along with us in the book of Ruth, or if you know the book of Ruth, you have to admit at the beginning of chapter 3, Naomi seems a little different, doesn't she? She seems to be acting a little bit different. You remember earlier in the story, Naomi, when they come back to the land of Judah, she told her friends, she said, "Don't call me Naomi anymore. Naomi means pleasant. I want you to call me Mara." Mara means bitter. She was bitter. She was a broken woman. She had suffered tragedy. But here she almost seems optimistic. She's making plans for the future. It seems that something had happened in order to restore her hope, because her hope had been lost. If you remember earlier, we found out that her hope had been lost when her husband died and her 2 sons had died. Her hope had been lost at that time. And then we see Naomi wrestling with this temptation that we all wrestle with when tragedy strikes our life. The temptation there was to get selfish. The temptation for her was to turn in on herself, to start to believe that she had a right to feel sorry for herself because of the tragedy that she had suffered, to continue to mourn for her son, who was Ruth's husband, and expect Ruth to continue to mourn for him as well. That was the temptation, and that was the desire that we all face when tragedies come into our life, when things get rough. The first thing that comes to your mind is, I want to isolate. I want to pull back. I want to draw back. I want to protect myself. I want to protect my heart from ever having to go through this again. And we see Naomi dealing with that. But what we see here in the middle of this story is that in the middle of that pain, in the middle of her, what had turned into bitterness for Naomi, God gave her an opportunity to hope. God gave Naomi, in the middle of that temptation she was in to turn inward and become selfish, gave her an opportunity to hope. An opportunity for her to stop thinking about herself and an opportunity to start thinking about someone else. And this opportunity came when she heard word from Ruth that Boaz had started showing an interest in Ruth, right? All of a sudden, her hope was reignited. She realized Boaz was a kinsman redeemer. Boaz was a close relative who might be able to redeem Ruth. And in that moment, Naomi had a choice now to make. She had a choice to make when God had given her that opportunity to hope. She had a choice to make. Was she going to continue to hold on to her bitterness? Was she going to continue to remain bitter and believe that God was out to get her? Even in the face of all evidence that was contrary to that, she had a choice. She could have done that. She could have held on to that. Does she continue to mourn the passing of her family members and by that encouraging Ruth to do the same thing because they're living so close together? She could have made that choice. Or does she humbly allow herself to be corrected by the Lord and to begin to trust once in the goodness of God? As we read the story, as we see, Naomi did the right thing. She began to hope and trust again once in the goodness of God. And there's an important lesson here for us. Don't miss this. Here's the important lesson for us here. It is only when Naomi's hope returns in the goodness of God. It is only when she begins to start trusting and believing and hoping in the goodness of God once again that she is now able to take her eyes off of herself. And she is able to start looking and thinking about the pain that other people are going through, namely Ruth. That's what we're talking about here. Look at verse 6. So Ruth went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." So here's Boaz. It's the end of the day. It's the end of the season. He's there threshing his grain, and I bet you he's probably feeling pretty good about life, right? The harvest is finally over. And all the stresses and anxieties that come with being a farmer, right? You have a product that is very temperamental, right? Dependent upon weather conditions, dependent on bugs and pests and other things. Well, all those anxieties and worries are now over with. The harvest is over. He's had some good food, he's had a drink or two, and he lays down at the end of the heap to go to sleep, which was probably a normal thing to do because, as we said, this was a wicked time. People were doing whatever they wanted to do. So I would bet part of the reason he laid down at the end of the pile of grain was to protect his grain from thieves. So it was probably a normal thing to do. And so Ruth does what Naomi tells her to do. She's basically stalking Boaz. She's watching Boaz. She's waiting until he lays down. She waits until he's fast asleep. And then she goes and uncovers his feet. Seems like a strange thing to do, but it's a very suggestive thing to do. She uncovers his feet and she lays down at his feet. Now, this was not only suggestive, this was a very bold and risky thing to do. And it was very risky because they had no idea how Boaz was going to respond. They knew how they hoped that he would respond, but they had no idea how he would actually respond when he woke up and found a woman laying at his feet. He would have no clear idea or understanding of what she was suggesting, right? Because at that time, especially during harvest, prostitution was very common. It was very common, as prostitutes would make their way to the threshing floor to try to earn some grain for themselves. They had no idea what to expect. I mean, how could this have possibly turned out good? It seems like a horrible plan. It seems like a terrible plan. All the conditions seemed right for things to go wrong. It's nighttime. They're alone. Boaz has had a few drinks, maybe, possibly. Prostitution is pretty common in the land in the time during this time. Everyone is doing whatever is right in their own eyes. I mean, really, you got to step back and think, how could this possibly turn out for good? If I was trying to plot this and scheme this, my first thought would be this: I know what's going to happen. Boaz is going to wake up. He's going to take you for a prostitute. And even after he finds out it's you, Ruth, he's going to think that you are prostituting yourself. And now he's going to probably either take advantage of you, take advantage of the situation, force himself on you, or best case scenario, he's going to think that you're offering yourself as a prostitute to him. And him being a man of God, him being a man of integrity and a man of character, he's going to chase you out and reject you and shame you in the community. That would be what I would expect would come of this. The possibility that things would turn out like they thought that they would turn out, very, very small. The fact that he would wake up and know it is Ruth, know that her intentions are honorable, and then respond and react in the right way, I'd say the chances were minuscule that this would happen. And so there they are. Ruth does as Naomi has instructed. She's laying at his feet. Boaz wakes up in the middle of the night. His feet are cold, right? He's probably shivering. He wakes up to adjust his garment to cover his feet, and there's someone at his feet. Now, I just picture this in my head, and I wonder if he let out a little scream, like that, and he started kicking. If it was me, I would have started kicking if I saw somebody. I wonder if Ruth got kicked in the face a few times. Before he said, "Who are you?" You can imagine, probably scared him. Or he says, "Who are you?" And Ruth says this. She says, "I am Ruth, your servant." And then she very boldly says, "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." Very boldly, she says, "Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And by this phrase, "Spread your wings over your servant," Ruth is basically, what she is doing is she is basically proposing that Boaz marry her. That is basically what she is doing. And Boaz would have understood this. He would have understood this. The idea is of a mother bird hiding her chicks under her wings to protect them from predators. She's basically saying, "Take me under your protection." Even to this day in a Jewish wedding, the man will throw the skirt of his robe over his new wife's body, over her head, saying, "You are now under my protection." That is what she was doing. That is what she was suggesting. She was basically proposing to this man. See, Ruth goes above and beyond what Naomi had told her to do. Naomi told her, just go to his feet. When he wakes up, he will tell you what to do. Ruth says, no. Ruth says, I'm going to tell you what I want you to do. You talk about bold, you talk about amazing, you talk about brave. I don't even know what you would call it, but whatever it was bold. Here she is. She is a poor widow, field worker, proposing to a rich landowner. She is a woman who had no rights in that society, proposing to a man, and a younger woman at that. She is a foreigner from a forbidden land, proposing to this Israelite. And then she goes on to remind this Israelite of his responsibilities to his family by mentioning the word redeemer. And the Jewish people were and still are very family oriented. He didn't need her to remind him about family responsibilities, and yet she did that. See, Ruth could have gone after a richer, younger man. But she pursues Boaz because he was related to Naomi. And if Boaz marries Ruth, he is now responsible to take care of Naomi as well. If Naomi had married outside of the family, she would not have had that same protection. So we see here in Ruth standing against the flow of her culture, which said if it feels good, do it. Live for yourself. Do whatever seems right in your own eyes. Ruth here stands against the flow of the culture and denies herself any desire that she might have to go after a younger, richer man. She lays down her own personal desires for the benefit of another. And Boaz here recognizes her loving kindness. He recognizes this. Listen to what he says to her in verse 10. He said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true
that I am a redeemer. Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. So Boaz wakes up, and hope against hope, he recognizes that it's Ruth. He recognizes that her intentions are honorable, and surprisingly, their plan works out like they had planned. But what's obvious here in Boaz's language is that he has a desire for Ruth. It seems obvious, right? He loves this woman. He loves what he knows about her. He has a desire for her. He tells her that he is going to do for her all that she asks. And I would imagine much more just by the language. He's going to do everything that she wants him to do because she's a worthy woman. And now think about what a weird statement. He said, "All my friends know, all the town knows that you are a worthy woman." How did they come to that conclusion? First of all, she hadn't been there very long. She hadn't been in the town very long, just a few weeks. She's a foreigner from a forbidden land. Probably people looked at her as an idol worshiper. She's a poor widow who picks up food off the ground after the harvesters. How could anyone possibly have seen anything of worth in this woman? I would suggest, I believe what's probably true, it was her devotion to her mother-in-law, Naomi, that they saw. This had to be it. The fact that she was not only willing to leave her own people and her own land, but she was willing to be faithful to her dead husband's family, come what may, no matter how hard things got, even willing to lay down her own desires. The people knew that about her. They saw that in her. They respected that about her. Ruth's actions stood in stark contrast to the culture that she was part of. And this gained people's respect. She was a foreigner, but she exhibited a covenant faithfulness that the people respected, including Boaz. And so there's a lesson here. I see some young men in here. There's a lesson here for you young men. Those of you who may one day be looking for a wife. This is the kind of woman you are to go after. This is the kind of woman that you are looking for. A worthy woman. A woman that loves the Lord. A woman that is willing to lay down her own desires for the benefit of another. A woman that is faithful to her family. You let these desires guide you, and you will end up happy and blessed. That is what you're looking for when you're looking for a woman. So back to our story. So we see Ruth was a good woman. She was a good woman of character. And Boaz, we found out, is just as good a character as her. We see something of the integrity and the honor of Boaz in the fact that he did not take advantage of the situation. He did not take advantage of Ruth there at the threshing floor. He laid down any desires he might have had in order to honor Ruth, to honor her family, and to honor himself. And the more that he talks in this passage, the more that we see he was willing to do even more than all this. What he was willing to do is amazing, and you might not see it at first glance. So I want to just focus in on it for a minute. We see it right here in verse 12. This is what he says. He says, "And now it is true that I am a redeemer. I can buy you back. I have that ability." But then he says this, "Yet there is a redeemer nearer than I." There is a redeemer nearer than I. See, in Hebrew law, there is an order of rank of redeemers based on the closeness of your relation to the person that needs something redeemed. So for instance, Elimelech had died. The closest redeemer, the closest blood relative to him would have the right to redeem whatever property he had. So first of all, the brother had the right to redeem. Closest in relation, the brother had the right to redeem. Then it would go to the uncle. Then it would go to the cousin. And then it would go to a close relative of the same clan. And then what Boaz is saying, he says, there's someone else that is closer to your ex-father-in-law, Elimelech, that is closer than I am. And then what we find out, we don't find out right here, but just a little look ahead. In chapter 4, we find out that there's a plot of land for sale. there's a plot of land for sale that belonged to Elimelech that now belongs to Naomi. So here's what's going on. Let me explain what's going on. The closest redeemer had the right to buy the land or property of a deceased relative. But at the same time, that close redeemer took that land, took that property, they would also have to marry Ruth. They would also have to marry Ruth. So Boaz, as much as he wants to marry Ruth, he knows that he can't both buy the land and marry Ruth. There's another kinsman redeemer who is closer than him. Legally, he cannot do it. And so what does he do? He lays down his desire to marry Ruth in order to get Naomi and Ruth the better deal. He lays down his desire to marry Ruth to say there's someone closer than me that can give you a better deal. He can both buy the land and marry you. We see Boaz lay his own desires down to make sure Ruth and Naomi are well taken care of. And then he promises her that either way, no matter what happens, you are going to be redeemed. He said, if he does it, great. You can tell that's not what he wants. He says, but if he doesn't do it, then I will gladly do it. And so there's a lesson here for you young women. I see some young women here today. Those of you who may one day be looking for a husband, this is the type of man you want to look for. You want to look for a man who is willing to lay down his own desires in order to honor you. You want to look for a man who is responsible and has integrity and takes care of things in the right way. Not a man who puts things off, but a man who takes care of things. That is the type of man you're looking for. Back to our story once again. So the morning comes and Boaz loads her up with grain once again. He fills her up with so much grain, I bet she had a hard time carrying it. And she takes it off to Naomi. Look at verse 16. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So Boaz tells Ruth, you can't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed, right? As I just sit and think about this, I imagine they were both probably so excited at the prospect of what was going to happen later that day. Ruth and Boaz, I bet neither one of them slept that night. And I would bet that as Boaz laid there, his mind probably started working. Okay, how did this happen? Why did she come? And he probably, Naomi put her up to this. This was Naomi's idea. And as a way to kind of thank Naomi for plotting and scheming in this way, sending Ruth to her to bless him, he says, here, take all this grain to your mother. You can't possibly go back to her empty-handed. So that's the story. And here in this story, we see these 3 people, that they're not following the culture, not living selfishly for themselves. Each of them is willing to live for the other. Each of them, the theme of their life, the motivation of their life basically is, my life is for you. That goes so against the culture of their day. It goes so against the culture of our day. My life is for you. We see this in Naomi, right? Naomi returns the same love and faithfulness to Ruth that Ruth has shown to her. And then she tells Ruth, my desire for you, Naomi tells her, my desire for you is to be settled in a home. I want to see you married and with a new husband. Yes, you are married to my son. Yes, it's hard. Yes, we grieve, but I'm living for you. My life is for you. I'm going to lay that down, and I want you to lay down your mourning garments. I want you to anoint yourself, and I want you to go and take this opportunity that the Lord has put before you. And then Ruth comes back, and Naomi is just so excited. She's not holding on to any bitterness about she was married to her son. She's so excited. She can't wait to hear what happened. Tell me what happened, my daughter. Tell me what happened. Right? She's living her life for Ruth. She's living her life for another, not selfishly turned inside. Ruth, that one's obvious. She remains faithful to her family. She sticks close to Naomi, even when bad times come, even when her desires may run contrary to what would be good for Naomi. She lays her desires down in order to live for Naomi. She goes out, she works, and she brings home armfuls of food to Naomi to bless her. She's also not concerned with the desires of most women her age, most young women her age, who would be happy to go after a younger, richer man. I think there probably would have been younger and richer men happy to marry Ruth. She doesn't do that. She boldly pursues Boaz because she knows with him as a husband, Naomi is going to be taken care of as well. She says, Naomi, my life is for you. My life is not my own. My life is for you. And what about Boaz? Boaz, from the very beginning of the story, he starts by taking care of these two widows, right? Ruth comes to work for him in the fields and he says, don't go anywhere else. Stay in my field. I will not only give you an abundance of food for you to take home to your mother-in-law and for you to enjoy, but I'm going to offer you my protection. I have told my men not to touch you. And then he's more concerned with Ruth's honor than his own desires there at the threshing floor. He lays down any bad desires that he has there at the threshing floor in order to honor Ruth. He takes care of things in the right way, even willing to lose a chance to marry Ruth in order to ensure the fact that they have the best deal possible, that they can sell the plot of land, have some money to live on to support themselves. What a great story. What a picture of selflessness that we need in our world today, that we need in our country today, that we need in Jackson, Tennessee today. But just imagine with me for a minute how this story would have gone had none of them done this. Had they all lived selfishly for themselves, right? We can imagine Naomi would have remained bitter and sour for the rest of her life, mad and angry at God. As we saw earlier, she still trusted in the providence of God, but she had begun to question God's goodness. She had begun to question God's goodness. She still spoke about God like he was in control, but it wasn't clear that she still trusted in his goodness. What if she had remained bitter and sour for the rest of her life, growing harder and harder towards God and towards others? Can you imagine her relationship with Ruth and the guilt Ruth would have felt getting over her mourning for Naomi's son? It would have been impossible if Naomi had lived selfishly for herself. What about Ruth? What if Ruth had lived selfishly for herself? When they were still in Moab and Naomi gave her the opportunity to turn back and go back to her people and her old gods, Ruth would have jumped on that. She would have jumped on that, gone back to her old people, gone back to her old gods, maybe even pursued a rich young man, left Naomi high and dry. Can you imagine Naomi's condition without Ruth in her life? If Ruth had just lived for herself, if she had not laid down her life for Naomi, Naomi would be in a heap of trouble. And what about Boaz? What about if Boaz had laid down, had given into any selfish desires he had to take advantage of Ruth and to dishonor her and to dishonor his family? The story would have been much different, right? The story, what it would have been another story in a long line of awful stories in the book of Judges. That's what we see in the book of Judges. People giving into their selfish desires. And had Ruth and Naomi and Boaz done that, it would have just been another nasty little story in the book of Judges. But thankfully, that's not what happened. That's not what happened. So the question that comes to my mind when I think about this, okay, great, yeah, good for them, pat on the back. What does that do for me? So the question that comes to my mind is, how were they able to do this? How is it that they were able to live their lives in order to benefit another? And I think it comes back to a simple thing. Not just one simple thing, but I think it's one simple thing among many, and this is it. A trust and belief in the goodness of God. A trust and belief in the goodness of God and his providence, even when you can't see how that's possible, even when things don't make sense. As we saw in the life of Naomi, it was when she began to trust in the goodness of God again, it was only then that she was able to stop thinking about herself and she was able to start thinking about the pain of another, when she trusted and hoped in the goodness of God again. See, the people who lived in the land at that time, in the book of Judges, the wicked people we've been talking about and pointing to and saying, yuck, those people, they had stopped trusting in the goodness of God a long time ago. Here's the evidence of it. The evidence of it is their lives. They pursued those things that God told them to not pursue. God told them, don't pursue those things. They're not good for you. They're going to hurt you. But what do their lives show? Their lives show the fact that they did not trust in the goodness of God. They believed God was trying to keep something good from them. And so they pursued those things that God said would hurt them. And so what happened? They sunk into sin and wickedness and depravity and ultimately selfishness. Selfishness. See, we need a hope and a trust. As a people, we need a hope and a trust in the goodness of God, even when we can't see it. Even when we can't see it. You know, Mary Catherine prayed earlier when she was standing up here that it's a dark time. It's a tough time for a lot of people. If ever we needed it, well, of course, us, because we're here in this time, we need that now. We need a hope and a trust in the goodness of God, even when there seems to be no reason, even when it's dark outside, even when there's clouds in the sky. We need a hope and trust in the goodness of God. This is what Hebrews 11:1 says. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Let's read that again. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. See, we hope in what we can't actually see sometimes, like the goodness of God, because as the scripture says, hope that is seen is not hope. So if we could see the goodness of God, there would be no reason to hope and trust and have faith in it. Hope that is seen is reality. It's not hope anymore. We need to hope and trust in the goodness of God even when we can't see it. And it's our hope in the goodness and promises of God, in the goodness and the promises of God, that will give us the ability to lead lives that are more concerned with others than with ourselves. Listen to this verse from Romans chapter 15 that Paul wrote. This is what he says. He says, for whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction. Here we are. We're reading something that was written in former days. We're reading the book of Ruth. So he's speaking to us. Whatever was written in former days, book of Ruth, was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the scriptures, we might have hope. It is through the book of Ruth where we learn to have hope. It is through the Old Testament, the New Testament, that we learn where to have hope. He goes on. He says, may the God of endurance and encouragement grant you to live in such harmony with one another, in accord with Christ Jesus, that together you may with one voice glorify the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Therefore, welcome one another as Christ has welcomed you for the glory of God. For the glory of God. How do we live in harmony with one another? Hope. Hope in the goodness of God. All that we do, we see here at the end of this verse, all that we do is ultimately to bring glory to God. That is your job. That is my job. We are to bring glory to the Lord. We don't do that by living selfishly. We do that by trusting him. We do that by trusting in his goodness, which allows us to now live in harmony with each other, no longer living selfishly for ourselves. So in closing, I just have a couple things that you can do. So who should you be in light of what we just read? What kind of person should you be? You should be someone who continues to trust in the goodness of God, even when you can't see it. That is what faith is. Trust when you can't see it. Hope when you can't see it. If you can't see it, if you can see it, it's no longer faith. It is now sight. We need to hope and trust in the goodness of God, even when we can't see it. And it is by reading these stories in the Old Testament, in the scriptures, that we get to see clearly. Tell me you haven't seen clearly, as we've been looking at the book of Ruth, how God is working behind the scenes. He's intimately involved in this story. As we read the scriptures, we are reminded of this. Hey, God was working behind the scenes. Yes, people were dying. People were sick. Things were dark. Things were crazy. And yet we see God putting the pieces in place to tell his story in a good way. And I guarantee you those three people in heaven today looking back would not change one single thing that God was doing in their lives. Was it hard? Absolutely. Did they understand what was going on? No, they did not. But now on the other side of eternity, I guarantee you they are thrilled and happy that they got to glorify God in that way. So what should you do? Well, you should live your life like this is true. It's as simple as that. Sounds simple, it's not simple, but you got to preach to yourself. You got to talk to yourself. You got to encourage yourself. I got to preach to myself every day just about. These things are true. Live your life like these things are true. Trusting in the goodness of God, even when things are dark, you know what that's going to do? It's going to free you up. It's going to free you up and give you the ability to now not focus on your own self, your own pain, your own suffering, but it's going to free you up, like Naomi. You're going to be able to focus on the pain and suffering of others, and in this way, you're going to glorify the Lord, and you're going to be a much happier person as you trust in the goodness of God, because one day, it's going to pay off. You're going to be glad you trusted in the goodness of God. We're only going to be ashamed of those times we did not trust and have faith in the goodness of God. That would be my encouragement for you today. God is good, even if you can't see it. Even when times are dark, even when the storms come, trust in the goodness of God. Will you pray with me? Father, it is not our faith in your goodness that makes it true. It's just true. You are good. Lord, even if you hadn't given us your word to see, the truth is you would still be good. We just wouldn't know it as clearly. But you have given us your word. We see it clearly, your providence, your redemption, here in the book of Ruth, Lord. Working behind the scenes, even through painful things, to bring about your plan that we don't understand. We don't have to understand. It's not for us to understand. But one thing we do understand and is clear, Lord, you are good. You are trustworthy. You are faithful. And none of us is ever going to stand in heaven and accuse you of being unfair. You are faithful and true and good, Lord. Help us to live this week, Lord, preaching to ourselves, reminding ourselves of these things, of your faithfulness and your goodness, the way that you are working in our lives, even in the little details where it doesn't seem like you are, you are. You are bringing your good plans to come to pass, Lord. Help us, Lord, not to be an obstacle to that, but to work in concert with you so that we can glorify you and get our eyes off of ourselves and get our eyes on people who need someone to listen, someone to care for them, someone to reach out for them, Lord. Father, I love you. I thank you for your word. In Jesus' name, amen.